gather here in Highams Library on the Saturday before Remembrance Sunday every year to honour the men named on the Halex plaques and to remember all those who have died in the cause of freedom. Since the 1st of November, now just under 2 weeks ago, the Royal British Legion has been selling poppies. People have been remembering in their own way, and tomorrow each of our 3 local churches will hold remembrance services. Historically, Highams Park was in the borough of Walthamstow. Our war dead from 1914 to 1918 are listed on the Roll of Honour, which is kept in Vestry House Museum. There is a cenotaph in the grounds of the Town Hall that was sculpted in 1922, and it bears the inscription, "In memory of the fallen of Walthamstow, 1945 to the present day." The Halex plaques, which are situated just over here in the library, are from an industrial memorial, not a civic one. But over the last 10 years, they have been situated in Highams Library. They have become a focus for our civic remembrance in Highams Park.
Edward Bridges lived for most of his life in Highams Park at 61 Winchester Road. He served in France from 1916 to 1918 as a soldier in the 2nd Battalion Essex Regiment and as part of the Trench Mortar Battery. In the late 1970s, he felt ready to record in writing his memories of the time spent in the trenches, and he gave this volume the title of The Armed Civilian. Edward Bridges was my grandfather. Here is an extract dated winter 1916. As we arrived nearer the front, we would pass the men who had just been relieved. As we did so, we would hear whispered questions in strained, anxious voices. "What's it like up there?" Of course, the question was quite unnecessary, for the reply was always the same. "Terrible, mate. Keep your heads down." Eventually, we were all allocated our places, and with a word or two between the corporals about the gun position, objection of enemy, range and nature of enemy retaliation, etc., we were left to settle down. It would soon be light, and we would discover for ourselves. Up to now, it had been comparatively quiet. A whiz-bang would come across occasionally, and the machine guns would sweep over the trench to catch out the foolhardy hero who would venture out onto the top. As the dawn broke, we stood by our guns for the usual stand to and began to assess our position. Not so bad, we thought. So this is Thrown Wood. We cast our eyes over the trench and were met with the sight of a landscape of broken trees and burnt undergrowth. Everywhere the ground was ploughed up. Enormous shell holes covered the land, spiked with drunken trees and shattered branches, sticking out of the ground like so many tombstones in a gigantic old cemetery. Later the next day, when we were just about getting the feel of the place, I bumped into a fellow from Essex and was in the process of asking him about D Company when I recognised Harry Harwood from Burnham Road in Chingford. "How is everything, Harry? What's the news?" We chinwagged on for a while and exchanged news of home. Harry was now a company runner and was on his return journey from HQ to the company. "Look out, Harry," says I. "It's about time for a blitz from Jerry along that trench." "I'll be all right," he said. "I'm an old soldier now." However, he had only been gone a few minutes when the trench was subjected to a violent salvo. "God, that's Harry!" I could not leave my post, so I asked the corporal to find out what he could. When I reached the scene, the stretcher bearers were lifting him out of the trench, and Harry thought he had a cushy job. For days later, every time I passed that spot, I thought I saw Harry lying there, cut to shreds. To think that only a relatively short time ago I had been camping out with the Boy Scouts. Then my only fear had been that the tent might be blown down or somebody would burn the sausages. I must have lived 100 years since then. As I gazed vacantly over the trench at those dilapidated trees, my thoughts were of Lark's Wood and Ainsley Wood, where I had spent my boyhood. Such happy days there had been, walking up the hill through the hayfields, keeping an eye open for the skylark, who would herald his presence with a sudden scuffle and scamper as he took my attention away from his nest, and then away he would fly. I would lie in the grass and listen to his song, higher and still higher, until his voice was lost in the clouds. This Trone Wood must have been such a wood, where children once played in their youthful innocence, and where people once came for peace. Sole witnesses to those peacetime activities were these splintered trees and torn stumps. No primroses grew here now. No wild creatures found sanctuary. Only an army of rats, scavengers living on the dead.
A poem entitled His Mate by G.A. Studdert Kennedy. There's a broken, battered village somewhere up behind the line. There's a dugout and a bunk there that I used to say were mine. I remember how I reached them, dripping wet and all forlorn, in the dim and dreary twilight of a weeping summer dawn. All that week I'd buried brothers, in one bitter battle slain. In one grave I laid 200, God, what sorrow and what rain. And that night I'd been in trenches, seeking out the sodden dead, and just dropping them in shell holes with a service swiftly said. For the bullets rattled round me, but I couldn't leave them there, water-soaked in flooded shell holes, reft of common Christian prayer. So I crawled round on my belly, and I listened to the roar of the guns that hammered Tiapval, like big breakers on the shore. Then there spoke a dripping sergeant when the time was growing late. Would you please to bury this one, 'cause he used to be my mate? So we groped our way in darkness to a body lying there, just a blacker lump of blackness with a red blotch on his hair. Though we turned him gently over, yet I still can hear the thud, as the body fell face forward and then settled in the mud. We went down upon our faces, and I said the service through, from I am the resurrection to the last, the great adieu. We stood up to give the blessing and commend him to the Lord, when a sudden light shot soaring, silver swift and like a sword. At a stroke it slew the darkness, flashed its glory on the mud, and I saw the sergeant staring at a crimson clot of blood. There are many kinds of sorrow in this world of love and hate, but there is no sterner sorrow than a soldier's for his mate.
On the 24th of February 2011, the Chingford Guardian reported a war memorial for workers from the former Highams Park factory has been returned to the area. The committee of the Highams Park Society had tracked down the Halex plaques, which in 2009 were being stored in a barn in Suffolk, and they oversaw their installation here in Highams Library. The Highams Park Society was founded in 2005 with the aim of promoting community life. We strongly believe that a community that has an interest in and knows about its history is a stronger community and one that can weather any storm. The Halex plaques once stood on a large Portland stone obelisk behind the main offices of the Halex works on Larksville Road. The original name for the company was British Xylonite. Xylonite was an early form of celluloid, and British Xylonite moved from Homerton to Highams Park in 1897. The Highams Park of 1914, just a few years later, was made up of the Edwardian core of shops, stations, cinema, and Victorian and Edwardian houses that we see today. All of this was then surrounded by farmland. The Xylonite works employed over 1,000 men and women in 1914. Some of them came from Highams Park, but many did not. They travelled in from Chapel End, South Chingford, and other parts of Walthamstow, South Tottenham, and also Leyton. The men named on these plaques were all employed by British Xylonite, or in the case of the World War II plaque, Halex. It is hard for us to imagine life in 1914 and how the chain of events, starting with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and culminating in Germany invading Belgium and Britain's declaration of war on Germany, how all of this was regarded by any of the men named here. From our own reading of World War I history, we know that no one anticipated 3 years of stalemate on the Western Front, bombs on the Somme that could be heard in Kent, mechanical warfare on a scale never seen before, living in trenches for 3 or more years, poison gas attacks, or unimaginable suffering. Whatever our views about the aims of the First World War and aspects of its strategy, today we think about the Halex men, their service to this country, and we solemnly reflect upon the fact that they never returned. In addition to our focus on 1914 to 1918, we also acknowledge and honour the men named on the smaller World War II plaque. And that was a war where the fighting came right to Highams Park, first during the Blitz and then for the duration of the war. Highams Park was specifically targeted by the Luftwaffe. There exists a German bombing document in which details are written of the Halex works, a target for German bombers. Ironically, the factory did not receive a direct hit, but many houses were bombed and local people were killed. We shall never know the true horrors that the men named on these plaques faced. They served their country, and our freedom today is based on their sacrifice. And this year, as we do every year at this time, we say, their name liveth forevermore.
Soldier Remembers by Roland Ruiz. As I walk into this field of valour in the early morning hours, I think of the many fine and brave soldiers who lie beneath the ground, with multitudes of painted crosses to mark their sacred graves. Thoughts slowly fill my mind of June the 6th, 1944. I remember only too well. The terror of that day is forever etched in my heart. I try to forget the screams of death that passed before my eyes, but even after all these years, the scenes of D-Day remain so vivid and clear. There's nothing I can do to rid the dreams which haunt me in my twilight years. The sand, the water, the blood, mixed with the sounds of death, cause me to pray to God to forgive my mortal sins. I remember following my sergeant into the water on that early misty morning. Just as we reached Utah Beach, a bullet struck his helmet, spinning him round, showing a bloody stump that used to be his head. For this young country boy who had turned 19 just 2 days before, there was no other choice. He suddenly became a man. As I raced past his lifeless shell, knowing that any moment my life could end too, somehow I survived this violent hell and went on to fight in other battles until the bitter end. Every so often I make this journey to remember my fallen comrades, and each time I leave a piece of me beneath the blood-soaked sands. As I approach my 81st year, I know this will be the last time I'll see my fallen friends. So I'll walk slowly through this hallowed field and say a final goodbye to those gallant soldiers who gave their lives for God and country as only heroes can.
This year, All Saints Church in Highams Park has a display of 2,000 poppies. There are poppy posters in the window of this library, and many of you, if not all, are wearing poppies. Lieutenant John McRae was a Canadian Army surgeon on the Western Front. He tended the injured and the dying, and as he did so, he noticed how poppies grew in profusion in the fields where the fallen lay. His poem, In Flanders Fields, was written in 1915. In the USA, Mona Michael read McRae's poem just before the armistice. She wrote her own poem, We Shall Keep the Faith, and as a sign of remembrance, she vowed always to wear a red poppy made from fabric. Following on from this, a Frenchwoman, Madame Guerin, also championed the wearing of a poppy for remembrance and also to raise money for veterans. In 1921, Guerin brought her campaign to the UK, and the newly founded Royal British Legion held its first ever poppy appeal. 9 million silk flowers were sold, and £106,000 was raised, a very large sum in those days. All of the poppies at that point were made in France. In 1922, a Major Jack Couin received a grant from the Royal British Legion of £2,000 to make poppies in England. The first ever poppy factory was located on the Old Kent Road, and it was soon employing 30 disabled veterans. In 1926, the poppy factory moved to Richmond, where it has remained ever since. Approximately 11 million poppies are sold every year, 135,000 wreaths, and 1.1 million remembrance symbols. The money raised from the sale of these goods goes to help ex-servicemen, women, and their families. And the poppy remains an enduring symbol. This year marks 100 years of the Royal British Legion's poppy appeal.
In Flanders fields the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row that mark our place. And in the sky, the larks, still bravely singing, fly scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved. And now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields.
In proud and grateful memory of the gallant men who left this place to fight in the cause of liberty and justice, and who laid down their lives in the Great War 1914 to 1918. C. Ames, A. Andrews, W. Baird, T.W. Brooke, A.J. Brooks, J. Elbert, J. Castle, H. Cox, G. Dafflon, P. Digby, H. Dinsdale, T.C. Edwards, T. Elms, E. Frost, S.J. Giblin, G. Glynn, W. Goodman, A.J. Hassler, S.J. Hollingsworth, F.C. Howes, E. Highland, C. Keogh, A. Lewis, C.B. Lockwood, W. Martin, C. Murrell, A. Neville, A. Newland, L. North, A. Nother, T. Oakley, G.J.N. Polly, E. Richardson, J.H. Rumble, H. Searle, H. Shaw, A. Slater, G.F. Smith, H. Smith, T. Sorrell, G.E. Stoddart, W. Stowe, W. Tanter, F. Ward, and in proud and grateful memory of their comrades who died for the same cause during the years 1939 to 1945. M.M. Carter, F. Dallas, C. Lewis, F.P.A. Simmons, F. Smith, E.A. Sorrell, A. West. Their name liveth forevermore.
They shall not grow old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. We will remember them.
the Kahima epitaph. When you go home, tell them bus and say, for your tomorrow we gave our today.